Hi there, I'm going to walk you through a method for poetry analysis known as TP-CASTT. TP-CASTT is simply an acronym for all of the pieces that you will analyze as you work through each poem throughout this unit. One of the most important things to keep in mind regarding poetry analysis is that a thorough understanding of the poem will require multiple readings of the poem itself. Before beginning your reading of the poem, the first thing you take a look at, the first T of TP-CASTT, is title. When you're looking at this, you wonder and consider, what does the title mean? You want to be sure that you consider the title's connotation before reading the selected poem. Recall our discussion of denotation and connotation early in the year. The next step of poetry analysis is paraphrase. For this piece, you're going to want to translate the poem into other easily understandable words. This paraphrase should focus on the literal or the denotative meaning only. Resist the urge to do any interpretation. Look specifically at syntactical units or complete sentences, and also enjambment as you're trying to paraphrase your poem. The best thing that you can do is paraphrase it either line by line, stanza by stanza, or syntactical unit by syntactical unit, which could be sentence by sentence. Once you have gone through the literal translation of the poem, this is when you're going to look into the connotation of the poem. At this step, you will extend beyond the literal level mentioned before and look for some of the emotional overtones of the diction within the poem. This is also the step where you consider the figurative language, the similes, the metaphors, synecdoche, etc. The next portion of the analysis requires you to consider the attitude or the tone presented within the poem. Look towards the speaker's attitude towards self, other characters, and the subject. Recall from our previous analysis of tone that the speaker and the author might be very different. After you've been able to observe the speaker's attitude, consider also the poet's attitude. Utilize p-diddles as a method of tone analysis. The next step is to consider the shifts within the poem itself. You may notice shifts in speakers or shifts in attitudes. Consider the occasion of the poem, the time, the place, the setting, the purpose for which it was written, keywords, punctuation, stanza division, changes in line or stanza length, irony, effects on structure, on meaning, as you are considering the various shifts that could be present within a poem. After you've read and done a basic analysis of the poem, I want you to consider the title once again. This time, consider the title on a more interpretive level, in the context of the poem itself, and not simply based on what it literally said. Going through all of the motions of TP-casting the poem brings you to the theme. At this point, you can determine what it is the poet is saying. List the subjects of the poem and then determine what the poem says about each subject. Recall our previous discussion of theme, where a single word or a single phrase is not enough for it to be a theme statement. What is the author saying about that particular content? For practice with TP-CASTT, we're going to take a look at a poem which many of you may be familiar with, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. As going through this process, the first thing that we should look at is the title itself. You see, the title is simple. It's Road Not Taken. So I know from my initial reading that the emphasis of this poem is on a road that was not taken by a speaker or someone else. In order to paraphrase this particular poem, I would look at it as stanza by stanza, since that seems to be where the unit of the poem lies. My paraphrase of stanza 1 is that there is a person who is wanting to go down two different roads in a particular wood, but is unable to do so. So stands there and looks down one as far as he or she can. The second stanza states that the speaker took the other road beyond what he or she looked down previously, and feels that this is perhaps a better road to take because it is not a road that has been well worn. And recognizing that where the speaker stands right now, those two roads had been worn at the same pace up to that point. The third stanza states that both of the paths were really quite equal, and that for the speaker the paths were not too well worn. And the speaker keeps the first path for another day, wanting to return and perhaps take that path, at the same time recognizing that the path will not be available to the speaker at another time. Within the final stanza, the speaker says that he or she will be telling this story about the road not taken somewhere down the road, and recognizing that these roads diverged in a wood and the speaker took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Considering the connotations of the poem, roads, or variations of the word, appear throughout the piece and certainly seem to have a symbolic meaning beyond a literal road within a wood. In fact, the road seems to be representing the choices that a person may take in one's life when presented with two different options. There's a major shift in this poem with the final stanza. Throughout the poem, we're progressing with the speaker and seeing the paths or the roads as they were on that particular day at that particular time. But with the fourth stanza, the speaker says that he or she will be reflecting upon this somewhere down the line and recognizing that one of the roads was taken. The final line, "and that has made all of the difference," certainly seems to hold the major meaning of the poem. What that difference is, readers cannot be entirely sure, but the path that this speaker chose is definitely what made the difference in his or her life. There are several potential tones within this piece, but an overall tone of the poem seems to be one of nostalgia and one of longing for the opportunities of the past. And "Sorry I could not travel" both is hinting at the fact that the speaker does have regret, but it doesn't come across as a very strong regret. It comes across as kind of a calm acceptance. The same with the line, "Oh, I kept the first for another day," reminds the audience that the speaker intended to go back or held on to that moment and that memory. The exclamation point may make us want to read this as being very excited, but when we look at the "oh, I kept the first for another day," it really is coming across as being reflective. The other reflective piece comes through in the next two lines, "Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back." And "I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence," gives the audience the feeling that this person is reflecting upon his or her life throughout the past. The final piece that makes me feel that this tone is rather nostalgic and also calm and at peace with the content of the poem and the choices that were made is the final line with, "and that has made all the difference." The ambiguity of this line certainly makes that peacefulness resound throughout the poem. Looking back at the title, "The Road Not Taken," it seems more and more that this poem has nothing to do with a road in a woods, but is really about the choices or the path or the option that a person may take in his or her own life. When I look at that title and consider the paraphrase and the connotation, the shifts and the tone, it starts to make me consider that the poet is acknowledging that a life choice will never quite be able to be redone. That no matter what the situation is, circumstances will change and one can never go back and take a different path or make a different choice from the one that was taken initially. Now that you have some basic understanding of what TP-CASTT means and how you would apply this acronym to poetry analysis, your task for the week is to look at a couple of different poems. Look to "Is My Team Plowing?" and see what you can do in terms of the TP casting of that poem and getting some overall meaning to the poem. Also, take a look at the poem "The Convergence of the Twain." Your task with that for now is just to look up the words that you're not quite sure of so that we can get more into the denotative and connotative meanings of those terms in class next week.